because I'm not sure whether it came from me or where it came from, but certainly in the papers it suggested things like Kerry cows and Dexters, which obviously aren't available in huge numbers and would have, in a large part, not be of interest to a lot of farmers. A lot of farmers in my area in Connemara, if you go to Mam Cross Mart, they have the traditional British breeds, continental breeds, sired by continental bulls, and suggesting going along the lines of Dexters and Kerrys is really not something they would be looking at. Angus you could agree with, they're a traditional breed in certain parts and would be more suited, but certainly they would be concerned there. Again, those farmers who would be grazing capped on the Commonages but no sheep, are they regarded as being active or inactive? They are farming the Commonage, but are they just in terms of your description? I know map farming on the Commonages was of concern in the past, and I would have raised this previously. I don't concur with that at all. Don't concur or agree with or condone it, I should say, that sort of thing going on. In terms of fencing, I know Deputy Barry mentioned fencing. Again, even if that was possible, you would have implications in terms of planning permissions, in terms of unenclosed areas and high scenic community areas and commonages, which they generally are. So there will be problems there as well. All in all, I think that, and I know delegation from Connemara IFA and Mayo IFA met with the Minister on this, and he was of the view that liaison groups within Commonages should be looked at, and I think generally the IFA in Connemara were supportive of this, and I would concur as well where that were possible, that the national parks, farm representatives, the department will sit around, starting with the simplest, easiest Commonages, and come up with a package looking at the minimum maximum stocking rates and all of this. I think there would be concern also in terms of just the amount of as I said earlier, elderly farmers and Commonages who may have been productive back before destocking came in. They were gradually destocked, as Deputy O'Keefe said. Maybe they would have had a son or whatever happen them at the time. Immigration took place. They're left on their own, and for them to even get up to, in some cases, minimum figures, if you're looking at it at an individual share approach, could be hugely problematic to them. So I would just be interested in your views on the liaison groups. The Minister tended to indicate that was something that he was agreeable to, and I think again the farm representatives in my area would have been supportive of that. But there are just some of the issues. It's hugely complex. Some of the most important figures that 70% of the Commonages are not damaged, and there is a tendency to assume that there was huge amounts of damage, but the 70% undamaged. I presume that's undamaged now, or undamaged then, or undamaged then. Okay. And what sort of figures have you in terms of now? In terms of overgrazing, I know we've seen from the slides the huge improvement that has taken place. And again, I just would be concerned about any sudden decision in terms of non-active farmers losing payments. And I appreciate that might be coming from the Commission, but again, I think from my view, the whole Commonage approach and pushing that idea to the Commission should be looked at.
Okay. Righto, back to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Again, I'd split the answers between the three of us, and I'll try and run on the themes which have gone through the questions. There was an interesting one there where it was mentioned by Deputy Kine about the Commonage with the 300 sheep, and you had three active farmers, yet you had 10 shareholders. I would say from the point of view of which is the most important thing, that you have 3 farmers who are active with 100 sheep, or that you insist that 10 farmers each have 30 sheep. I would say it's that the 3 have 100 sheep, and that we keep the Commonage engaged and maintain it that way. That is the key thing. So it is a whole of Commonage approach. That is the most important thing in terms of what we achieve here. It is about making sure that we put in place practical solutions which help us to solve the problem with regard to this. With regard to what Senator O'Donnell said about the figures of minimum and maximum, I know they were contentious at the time. They're a starting point. You asked about the consultation process. It's still on. It's ongoing. The problem that we have here is that there's a series of dangers here. There's 4 specific dangers if we don't do this right. The first is the danger to the reputation of this country if we lose the Commonages. The second is the loss of the payments to the farmers because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They will lose the payment. The third is the possibility of the Commission coming back and either restarting proceedings against this country or putting in place massive disallowances against the administration for not enforcing the rules. And the fourth thing is the loss of biodiversity, recreation, etc., because the Commonages will simply become overgrown. They're the dangers. That's what we need to do. As I say, I'm not putting a time scale onto it. We are in the consultation process. We want to talk to everyone on that. With regard to the point that you made about the gorse fires in 2011, there's no doubt we lost 1,500 hectares of forest alone in that. I think we learned a lot from it, a hard way to learn the lesson. But I mean, if we do have a burning policy, it has to be managed and done in a way in which the sort of appalling damage which we saw in 2011 is not repeated. With regard to Senator Comiskey and the over and under grazed, the agreements must reflect the realities on the ground. That's the only way, If the problem is overgrazing, get animals off. It's undergrazing, which is becoming an increasing problem. We've lost 2 million sheep. There's 2 million lawnmowers have disappeared over the last few years. Because at the height we had over 5 million sheep. It's now, I think, about 3.5 million. From an overgrazing point of view, it is a problem in parts, but undergrazing is becoming the increasing problem that we have. On Deputy Barry, with regard to the map acres, there is no toleration for map acres from my department's point of view. We've dealt with a number of cases where people have had more entitlements than land and have put in bogus claims on land which isn't a acre. It is virtually mountain. We've had a number of cases which have gone to the appeals office recently where people have lost their entire payments. And as I say, we have zero tolerance with regard to map acres cases. The dormancy issue is coming up all the time. How do we deal with it? As I say, it can't be avoided. We have to have some way to deal. Now, it's whether the active people will step up to the plate on this and help avoid it. But the difficulty we have is we're now having things where there's 9 or 10 shares and there's only 3 farmers left. There must be some way of dealing with that from the point of view. With regard to coupling, I know that there is going to be a percentage of the future cap payment which will be devoted to coupling. I'm not sure whether there will be a series of competing interests there, whether it's sucklers or whatever. So I'm not sure whether coupling is the solution there. So they're just some of my preliminary thoughts on that. Paul, would you like to say, and then Andy, continue.
Just to respond to Deputy Kine in relation to the figures, we spoke about them before in the context of what farmers declare and not declare. The figures that Dr. Blease gave was the total reference area, which is the total eligible area as we see it as of now, which is 430,000 hectares roughly. The figure that we gave is 330,000 was the total area declared in 2012, claimed in 2012 by farmers. So some of that, as I said before, was some farmers wouldn't claim their entire share, and all this is because of dormant shareholders and so on. So that is the difference between the data. They are just 2 separate figures. In relation to dormancy, again, this is an issue that crops up and up again, and it will crop up more and more in these discussions that you have yourselves with other parties and that we have as part of our consultation process. And there may be other solutions than just paying somebody to leave part of the commonage there as it is and not farm it. There may be other solutions. We'll have to look at them. There are legal issues about how you can claim commonage, and the actual claimants will have their own views on this, but it is possible, and I'm only saying this out loud, it's not coming as official policy, that the existing people that are using the commonage might be able to claim more of that commonage, lease it or rent it, whatever you call it, from the dormant shareholders to give them a higher payment and to fully utilise the commonage, graze it properly and keep it engaged. So it's something that can be looked at. We're not sure if it will be legal and if it meets the requirements of the EU regulations, but we should look at it, and we will look at it in the context of our discussions with the people that are farming the lands, because we keep going back to that those are the people that we need to speak to. I think Senator O'Donnell referred to what Commonage farmers I spoke to. I didn't get as far as Donegal, or they came to me, but generally I've spoken to farmers from Mayo, Galway, Sligo, Leitrim, Kerry and Cork, who were all farming commonages and all gave their own views on.
Very welcome up anytime.
I'd love to come up at the time. But in any event, we're fully aware of the situation in Donegal as we are in all other parts of the country. The possibility of making Commonage a region, I'm not sure it's a possibility. In reality, the implementation of the new CAP reform in all its facets, be its convergence and flatter rate payments, be greening with all the different requirements for land measurements for crops and so on under the greening, it's going to be a very complex system to implement, and will be difficult for the department to do so and difficult for farmers to do so as well. So I'm not sure that making Commonage lands a separate region would be the answer to our problems, or to the problems of the farmers, more importantly, that are dealing with it. Maybe to go back again, sorry, going backwards and forwards, to just respond to Senator O'Donnell in relation to the data. Well, you've got the background to the data from Dr. Bleasdale and from Kevin Smith in relation to the min-max. There was the initial, I think, push for this came from farmers farming the commonages who felt they were hindered, were hindered by the destocking plans and wanted to expand. That was one push in relation to it. And there was, as well as the department were launching AOS 3 in the autumn of 2012, there was a requirement that farmers who had commonage lands that they were to submit details of the stock that they intended to put on the commonage land. So that they were essentially the drivers at the time, but it's now been made clear, that this thing will not be implemented until we fully consult with all parties involved. You talked a bit about timescale, and we did put points about the urgency. The urgency relates, I suppose, to the European Commission rather than to any internal driver. But the reality, in my view, is that it's important to put the plan in place and the bones of the plan in place. And that plan can be for a long duration. It has to be for a long duration for it to work. And it can be tweaked and changed as you go along. It's just important to get the first steps. And the first steps are, in reality, this consultation process. And unless the consultation process is comprehensive and complete and involves everybody, it will not work, in my view. So the urgency is to get the consultation process in place and eventually start putting the bones of a plan in place.
Sorry, just a question of apportionment. Whereas people taking lands and lowlands and highlands. Have you any opinion on that?
Essentially, it's complicated. As everybody says, or have said earlier on, commonages are difficult. And the position you say people have been claiming them all along and they weren't aware. But how this evolved was that when Area Aid started off and 150,000 applications came in and maps and commonages, they weren't in a position to drill down deeply into who owned commonage, who didn't, and why they were claiming it. In a lot of situations, maps came in, one shareholder or one person claiming the map, claiming the commonage, would send in a map for all the other shareholders, and that's how it got into the system. Now, in the last few years, as part of the EU audits that incorporated commonages, we had to try and create a database and bring our systems more up to date so that the information we can stand over who is entitled to claim a commonage and who isn't. Most of the commonage land in the country is registered in undivided shares which you can rent, and they don't have to travel with the parent holding. Where the commonage is in appurtenance, it means that it legally cannot be detached from the green land or the lowland to which it's appurtenant. So essentially, in simple terms, it's not legal to say, I have this grazing right and I'm going to give it to you for X amount so that you can graze on it. Historically, how this evolved down through the Land Commission was the appurtenance went with a specific piece of land, and if you're not farming that land, you're not entitled to the grazing right. Now, in the context here of trying to get back to the way things were done historically and keeping them all well maintained the way they were farmed years and years ago, the question of anybody ever detaching a grazing right in the past, 150 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. As Senator Comiskey said there, every year they used to meet up and decide how they were going to graze the commonage. In addition, you can have grazing rights that are appurtenance as things called sums, collops. They can be calculated vis-a-vis the total amount of green land you have. So they're not like other normally undivided commonage. And we can't be seen to be going against the legal position because that's the law. It's enshrined in land law. In addition, the Commission will be back on commonages, and where they haven't got into the real registered ownership, who's claiming what and are they entitled to it, but they will someday. So the answer is, at the moment, it doesn't appear legally that you can detach an appurtenance from the green land to which it attaches on a folio. However, maybe somewhere within a Commission regulation there might be something that contradicts that if you're farming something, you're entitled to claim it.
I thank you for your response, but it creates such an uncertainty that nobody's going to risk it, and maybe this whole appurtenance thing needs to be looked at, because the reality is you'll lose all your payment, which is not the basis of doing business.
It depends on the reasons why they're claiming the
I've seen one in particular, and I was quite surprised with it. The person didn't go in to break the law, but obviously it didn't conform with the rules. So but the intention was never there to break the rules, and therefore it's a very difficult situation. So I'd hate to see anybody else getting stuck, especially when you're talking about commons.
I'm not disputing that, but you could turn it around the other way. That if you're trying to get agreement on commonages, and you can't get an agreement, and one of the people who doesn't want to agree could be going down the route of saying, well, that person is entitled to claim. They don't have the green land. They're renting an appurtenance which isn't legal. So it works both ways.
Yeah. Right. I think you got to play. Oh, sorry, yeah. Beg your pardon. Mr. O'Keefe, is it? Yeah. Okay.
I was just going to come back to two things. One in relation to, again, the pressure. Now, I think what Evans has answered to a considerable extent, but we have what we call the SAC Monitoring Committee, which is between NPWS and all of the farming organisations, are the key ones, including ICSA as well as IFA, ICMSA and so on. And for the last couple of years, sorting out the commonage plans has been a big issue, and in particular allowing restocking, which is something we were keen ourselves because of the undergrazing issue. And also in that context, and recognising that collective responsibility is difficult, but the mantra has been freedom to farm, and that does actually suggest to some extent that where you can do it, at least that collective responsibility would be a good way to go. But we recognise that that's not simple, particularly in the big commonages. Can I also just go back to the issue of fencing in relation to sorting out overgrazing issues? Our experience often is that having fencing to the hill just makes for additional new lines that obviously the sheep will walk the fence, and you start to run into new problems there, and there's a temptation perhaps to hold large numbers of animals at certain times. So it might solve one problem up there and it very often creates a new problem elsewhere.
Do you have anything to add, Dr. Blease?
Just very briefly, I suppose. 23 years ago, when I began to engage in the Commonage area through my studies in college, I didn't think that I'd end up here 23 years hence still discussing commonages, and the problem hasn't gone away, and there are just a whole suite of different problems. So to some extent I rue the day that I ever got involved. In another way, in a more perverse way, I actually would like to see it through, and I can feel that it's within grasp if we can work well together, much better than we have in the past. I think that opportunity is there, and I think this isn't just idle talk. We do actually welcome the dialogue, because that is the only way we'll have a material effect on the ground. Okay. I think what we need to do is we need to separate out, though, what are legacy issues, and there are a whole suite of those in relation to the Commonage framework plans. And it comes back to the question is who is driving this. To my mind, it was often coming from the farmers themselves, who felt that they wanted to be more active than they currently were allowed to be on commonages, and then were approaching us with a view to having the Commonage framework plan replaced. But the question is, replaced with what? We can't allow a free-for-all. We don't want to maintain the status quo. So there has to be a new reality, a new vision, a new partnership that allows us to plan for a better management of the uplands while protecting payments as best we possibly can. I'm glad it was referred to the compensation culture. I don't actually like the word compensation either. I think it was Deputy Kumsky who brought it up first. I think this is payments for deliverables, whether these are ecosystem goods and services, whether it's sheep production, whether there's a market for that. But I think it has to be couched in that language, because the compensation culture has to be something that is done away with. Farmers are farming. They're farming in productive areas, delivering produce. In more extensive areas, they're delivering biodiversity goods and services. And both should be valued and paid for. So I think we need to do away with our own language that we tend to use ourselves. I do as well, compensation. It should be payment for services, and that then makes it a more positive, and it's not even spin, it's a more positive product. The farmer feels valued. He's not being restricted. He's actually been encouraged to do something that is positive. Again, Senator Comsty mentioned the fact that commonages are still being overgrazed. I think we need to remember that that is still the case, and not lose sight of the bigger issue when we're dealing with what we consider now to be a bigger problem of undergrazing. There is still overgrazing going on, and we need to address that. And he did also mention that there was a history, and we're not reinventing the wheel in terms of collective management. Whether it's going back to our grandfathers and grandmothers' times, they did manage to get on. They did manage to actually hammer things out and come to agreements and self-regulate and self-determine. Now, it's not easy to turn the clock back, but I think where that can be progressed, it should be progressed. And I don't think personally that the liaison committees ideally are the solution. Nor equally do I think that the collective model is that you force all the farmers who are in a commonage to sit around the table and stare across at someone they haven't spoken to for 30 years. But I think through professional supports, whatever we call it, whether it's a planner, a facilitator, whoever, he would engage with each of the individuals and acquire from them the knowledge that they wish to impart through the process, and pull that information together to plan for sustainable management of those commonages in the years ahead. I guess that's effectively it. We've covered the issues and we're going around in circles.
We have a vote call. Sorry, I'm going to have to say a few words myself here. Sorry, Deputy, to title this. Unless we want to come back, which I don't think we'll. Well, I'm going to make a suggestion here. Given the fact that we've had a very 2.5 hours of very, I would consider, constructive engagement here, that we wouldn't end this just here. I think you've got a flavour of the level of interest, engagement and knowledge that's around the table here from the members, and a genuine interest in doing this. Dr. Bleasdale has just said at the very end, which is to try and develop a practical plan that deals with the commonage issues and puts it, to bed for a long time. I think there is a practical solution to it. I think dialogue is the only way it will be achieved. I just say economics is a key part of this. At the end of the day, overgrazing occurred because of a coupled system that meant that headage payments meant the more sheep you had, it made it economically. Likewise, economics is playing a part in the opposite effect, as are vegetation management plans, which do encompass burning and other things, and cutting of the likes of rhododendrons and the rest. So I think from that point of view, what we need to develop is high-level sort of bones, as Mr. Evans has said, the bones of a plan which establishes principles. Collective responsibility, where everybody is responsible if one person is playing truant, is not going to really be the answer either. So I think we have to establish how we approach dormancy, people who are not cooperating, and yet try and achieve a whole of Commonage good, that the Commonage, each Commonage as a whole is in good condition. It will boil down to doing a series of laborious and extensive development of individual plans, and concentrate on the 11 or the less than 20% probably at this stage that are not in good condition, either through over or undergrazing, and start with them and leave the ones that are in good condition until last when it gets down to it. So if members are agreeable, and I appreciate Deputy O'Quiv has a huge interest, as is Deputy Kine, who, for the purposes of what we want to do, we would ask as a visiting member, I think, and to the committee, because there are people who have a specific interest. Where I come from, there are issues around a whole vegetation management plan, and other areas, both Donegal and Kerry and the Connemara have a huge amount of national parks, so there's a huge interaction between the state and the individual grazers and people with rights on them. So if you'll agree to it at some stage, we would like, even if we establish a subcommittee here that maybe would engage with both the department and NPWS in the course of just the consultation process. I think we have something to offer this as well, and we will have other stakeholders in. So I thank you again, gentlemen, all five of you, for that. Thanks to the members who have stuck with it, and for hope we've given everybody a chance to give their point of view. So we have a vote called, and as there's no further business, this meeting stands adjourned until this Thursday, the 21st of February at 9:30 a.m. Thank you.